Jay Santos here, League Commish. With my main man, Dougie Fresh. How you doing, boy?
Oh, how you doing, boy?
How are you doing, boy? Anything good in the hood?
No, man, I'm glad you adapted that word. We're going with commish now. Much easier pronunciation than commissioner.
Correct. Trying to do as few syllables.
You wish you hadn't gone there.
I went there. And anyway, so we're actually going to be doing a different lineup this week. We're going to be doing, before we get into that, I did want to mention one thing about the last podcast because I got off, or Doug and we got disconnected because Doug has the shittiest internet east of the Mississippi.
Agreed.
And so I just did the podcast by myself. And when I did the podcast, I heard from a couple people, mainly just Sean, that I said the words, I digress, a lot. So I listened to it. And yeah, I think in like a 1 minute span, I said I digress about like 5 times.
Not great, man.
Not great, but I do have to say that when it comes to editing the podcast, you say the word literally 1,000 times. Like I don't even need to listen to the sound at all, and I know exactly what your sound waves look like. So it's easy for me to edit that. I just basically just go. That's an
That's cool, but my I feel like can be a little bit different from time to time. Like I use them conversationally, so you should fuck right off. Okay.
You have a solid. Yeah, so I'm gonna go with Tariq Cohen over Jordan Howard. And yeah, the Bears are looking like a solid team. And then that's the guy I'm gonna go with. Like it's consistent like that throughout.
I was really concerned that I just lost you because I didn't hear any of that, but something tells me that I didn't want to.
I agree with that. All right, so moving on anyway. So we're doing a different rundown. We're just going to be going over, we're going to start off with the Week 7 matchups, last week's matchups first, picks, current standings, and then since Week 7 was actually the middle of this past season, we're going to go over some mid-year fantasy calls, fantasy reviews like the MVP, least valuable player, second half breakouts, and then second half busts, along with our board bets, then the bye weeks, and then Week 8 matchups. So we're going to be switching up a little bit, so enjoy the ride. All right, so for Week 7 matchups, the top couple matchups that we had for Week 7 was Timmy versus Kevin, Doug versus the Beaties. Those were the top matchups. So why don't we start off with one that went down to the wire, and that one was Timmy versus Kevin. And oh boy.
Battle of the Barretts, as they say.
Battle of the Barretts. And this one came down to literally the last play of the game where Saquon Barkley ran in a 2-point conversion with basically no time left to seal the deal for Kevin over Timmy. And I'm sure that talk did not go over well with Timmy. But Timmy kind of had it coming because he sat Melvin Gordon, so that didn't work out for him. What's up? Yeah.
No, he played Melvin Gordon.
He played. Yeah, I said I sat him. No, and he wanted to sit him, but he didn't.
He should have sat him. He didn't play.
And he put up a goose egg for him.
I mean, that is an egregious blunder when, biggest fantasy game of the year going against your brosifs, your literal brosifs. That is a blunder.
Yeah. Well, to Timmy's credit, the game started at like 6:30, but I mean, you got to set your alarm at like 6:25 just to double check, and then you could swap in. You could have literally swapped in any other player on his team and he would have won. But he didn't. And so looking at the rest of the players besides Melvin Gordon, Timmy still had a good showing. I mean, he had Adam Thielen show up, who is proving to be the best wide receiver in the NFL, at least this year. Kenyon Drake actually produced for him in the flex spot. And Mitch Trubisky had a phenomenal game fantasy-wise. But if you were one of the unlucky souls to watch that game. It was as Bortles as it gets. I
Yeah,
mean,
man.
he ran for 80 yards, I think, and then scored a touchdown. And but he just couldn't complete a pass. I think he had under 50% completion, at least in the first half, and I think he bumped it up in the second half. But it was just awful, awful, awful. Doesn't really hurt Timmy, because he still put up 31.4 points. But oh my God, it is terrible to watch him play quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, I comped him to Bortles earlier this year. He he's not very good. This was the spot for the Bears. Like, people are trying to get on the wagon with the Bears, and this was a spot, like, they were only, New England only favored by 2 against Chicago. Chicago kind of jumped out and got them a little bit early, and you thought, man, maybe the Chicago team's legit, and then they just fucking shit down their legs. Like, they're not. They are who we thought they were, as one Dennis Green would have said. But you're right. I mean, he produced. Speaking of Trubisky here, and he might continue to do that, but it's very Bortles-esque, as you mentioned.
Very Bortles-esque. Moving over to Kevin's side, I mean, he got contributions from his team. His top end players like Saquon. I said it earlier in previous podcast. He's the best running back in the NFL.
Might be the best.
Yeah, that's crazy, but he might be. Cam Newton showed up. Cam Newton actually had a phenomenal fourth quarter. I mean, the Eagles just blew that game.
Yep.
How are you up 17 points in the fourth quarter and within 12 minutes just piss that away?
That's yeah. I mean, that's the second game that the Eagles have blown up 17 points. Not good.
Not good at all. But Cam was dealing, at least in the fourth quarter in that game. In the first half, he was really, really bad. But in the fourth
What I
quarter,
like about Cam, I watched a little bit of that game, and every time he throws, he looks like he's loading it up to throw it as absolutely far as he possibly can.
yeah,
And then you realize, he's just throwing the 7-yard out. It's just going 9,000 miles an hour. And I just really respect that about Cam's game. Like, he just, he respects his own arm to the point where he'll just load up and throw everything as hard as he can.
yeah. It doesn't matter if it's like a 2-yard swing pattern by Christian McCaffrey. He's just like, this is going to get stuck in your chest if I have any say. He's not an accurate thrower, but he's definitely got one of the bigger arms in the NFL. And AJ had a great game, even though that was a bad game to watch versus Kansas City. Did a lot of his damage in the first half. Mike Evans, I don't think he scored a touchdown, but he still had a pretty good game. Alshon Jeffrey. Alshon actually looks better after surgery than he did last year, which is crazy.
Man. John Jeff is balling.
But the rest of his players didn't really do much, but he was able to get that 2-point conversion in order to pull off the win. You got anything else to say?
Yeah, Timmy got a fairly Kamara line, 14.5 against Baltimore is actually pretty solid. I think you couldn't have asked for much more in that spot. But, he's got guys like Ito Smith, Taylor Gabriel, Greg Olsen in the lineup, and not going to get a ton out of these guys.
Yeah, he's riding on his 4 ponies, which is Melvin Ingram, Kamara, Thielen, and, T.Y. when he's fully healthy, which is fine. He can go far with just those players. But when Melvin doesn't play,
that's a problem.
Yeah. All right, so moving on to the other top matchup, which was you versus the Beaties. Not what you and I were both expecting, or at least we're hoping for. The Beaties pulled off a 13-point, a little bit under 13-point win against you. And, of course, Todd Gurley goes off again. The guy, we'll touch base on him in a little bit, but the guy is an absolute stud. Now, I did watch a good amount of that game, and his touchdowns, though, I mean, you could have had, Royce Freeman running in. They weren't impressive runs, just the offensive line was just manhandling the 49ers defensive line. But hey, I mean, it's Todd Gurley, and so he goes off for almost another 30-point game. Tariq Cohen, I mean, we said it last time. The offense just looks better with Tariq Cohen in there as opposed to Jordan Howard, and it proved once again this week how he had 18.3 points. Receivers such as Brandon Cooks and Devin Funchess, had 15-point games. Diggs, I say it all the time, I'm a Diggs guy, but he did not produce. I think he got like 10 plus targets in this game. And what was it, like 30 yards that he had?
He caught 8 of 14 targets for 33 yards.
Yeah.
Stephon Diggs, everybody.
Nah,
that's back-to-back with 33 yards.
Right, but he also has, once this loads up, he also has 2 games of over 10 catches, or 10 plus catches, 3 games of 9 plus catches, and combined together they come out to over 300 plus yards. Like, it was a bad game, I'll admit it, but he's better than that. Yeah, the Beaties have one of the best teams. Moving over to your side, you got your game out of Pat Mahomes and Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce. So your trio produced for you, and Kerryon had a great game. So let's talk about Kerryon. So what's his name? Theo Riddick didn't play, so he got more snaps in it. I did also see that he got a few touches in the red zone, but he couldn't punch it in. LeGarrette Blount comes in and then vultures away a touchdown. But he did go 19 for 158 rushing, and then 2 catches for 21 yards. We came into the year saying that, Kerryon was a special talent. They were just waiting to get around either the Theo Riddick or the LeGarrette Blount. What are your thoughts? I know it's a little biased because he's on your team, but what are your thoughts about Kerryon Johnson?
Yeah, I love what I see out of him. I'm just doing some quick numbers here, but he's averaging well over 6 yards a carry, which, as we know, does not happen in the NFL really at all, especially given the number of targets that he's getting. I'm sorry, of carries that he's getting. 19 for 158 is no joke. And Riddick has kind of always been just a guy they use because he's there. He's fairly effective in the passing game. But they're kind of in the thick of that race in the NFC North. And if they're gonna compete, it's gonna be on the back of this guy. Stafford's great and all, but the line seems to do better running the ball than it does passing the ball. And I don't know how you get away from this guy with the way he produces and the efficiency he gives you every time he touches the ball. So, from a fantasy aspect, yeah, he's great. For me, it's probably not going to be enough, and not getting in the end zone is a problem. But for the Lions as a whole, I mean, they have to feel really good about drafting this guy where they did.
Yep, I agree with most of that. Now, I do think this was kind of a perfect situation for him. Theo Riddick was out. It would have been even more perfect if LeGarrette Blount was out. But, Theo Riddick was out of the game. The Dolphins don't have that great of a run defense. And Detroit was able to still move the ball up and down the field. So it kind of it was a kind of perfect situation for him. I don't see great matchups, at least in the short term. I think they go against the Bears a couple times. Let's see, Minnesota, Carolina, the Rams.
Definitely not great.
He's got some tough matchups, so I don't think they're going to be as rosy as this one matchup. But we both like the talent. We both like if he does get the opportunity. So at least you have that going for you.
Yeah, as far as the rest of the matchup too, like you said, the Beaties got what they need to get out of their guys: Cooks, Funchess, Cohen, McCaffrey, all kind of coming through for them. But if you look at my bench again, it's a situation where I can't. It's hard for me to pick the right guys. Trey Burton's a guy I've been trotting out there in the flex a couple of times already this year. I bench him this week. He goes for a casual 23 over either of my flex guys. He gets the job done for me. So another week where I can sit here saying shoulda, woulda, coulda, but I didn't. So again, tough tough go for me. Boyd in a really good matchup, didn't do much. Same with Galladay. Goodwin has really been hard to peg, and again, hats off to the Beaties. They got it done kind of across the board, and I did not.
Hats off to the Beaties. Yeah, actually, last week, if you swapped in Goodwin instead of, I think it was Burden, you would have won. So then this week you do the opposite, and it kicks you in the dick. All right, well, moving on to the limp dick matchup of the week. So that was me versus El Shawno.
Wasn't that limp?
Was not that limp at all. It was a lot closer than I liked it to be. I honestly didn't see Sean's team putting up close to 130 points. It was closer than I wanted. In that Monday night game, I definitely was watching that pretty heavily, especially since Odell went over 20 points. But Shona got a good showing out of some of his players. As my computer loads up, what I do know is that Shon's got a better team than we all expected from the beginning of the year.
Yeah, when he can trot out James White and TJ Yeldon and they can combine for 40 points, he's going to be in okay shape because the receivers are sneaky solid. I mean, they are, between Beckham, Tate, Edelman, he's, he can get it moving a little bit. It wasn't a great week for Tate, but as you mentioned, Beckham goes for 24. Edelman finds the end zone, and again, James White's like the number 6 running back right now. Brady kind of finding his stride a little bit. Amendola out of nowhere from the parking lot with 17. He can get it going. Tight end's clearly a problem for him. Playing Chuck Clay gets the old -5 from the defense there. Also not very good. But again, your team is just kind of too much for most people to handle.
Well, I mean, I didn't get major production out of Julio and Keenan. So I really need those two guys to get in the end zone. I mean, it's great when they put up double digits, but at the same time, like I'm kind of looking for them to put up 15 plus points a game. John Brown had a great game. Zach Ertz is the best tight end in the NFL. So since we're talking about Zach Ertz, how do you feel about your call that Dallas Goedert's going to take over for Zach Ertz starting next year now?
I mean, I didn't say that he was going to take over for him. I thought that he could start to eat into the workload. He actually is still fairly involved. I think did he catch a touchdown this week? He may have.
Yeah, he did. So,
he's involved. Ertz has definitely got more in the tank maybe than I thought he did. But, Goddard involved, and Ertz, that Philadelphia offense is kind of just Ertz and Jeffrey. The running game is kind of non-existent. It's a smorgasbord of Clement and Smallwood and Josh Adams. Who knows if does Sproles come back and what have you? So Ertz is definitely the guy that I'm looking at on your team that kind of scares me the most is Gordon. Every single week he seems to be more and more involved in this Patriots offense, and he's a pig snagger, as my buddy Ty would say. He snags pigs, man. When Brady throws it to him, he grabs it. And if they continue to build on that chemistry and work a little bit more closely, he's eating away. I mean, Chris Hogan who? He's not even there anymore. Goodbye. Yeah. Edelman catching like 4 balls last week. It's all a result of Gordon being there. I mean, he got, I think, double-digit targets again. So you're in really good shape with Julio, Keenan Allen, and then Mixon and Gordon there. So, again, that's the guy that probably scares me the most about your team.
Well, Gronk didn't play in that game, so Brady's best receiving option wasn't in there. So, Gordon got a little bit more looks than what he's probably going to get the rest of the year. But quick stat on Zach Ertz. No tight end since 1999 has seen more targets nor had more catches through the season's first 7 weeks. So he's having a career year so far. And so, I mean, he can only go down from here. So if he goes down...
He's on pace for well over 110 grabs.
Yes. He hasn't had a game where he's had I think under 9 targets. So
Sure.
almost 10 targets game. But like I said, this can't be sustainable throughout the rest of the year. So he's only going to go down. But I did have Latavius Murray in there instead of Cook because Cook's hamstring is just not getting better. I saw something that he's probably going to be out until after their bye week, which is week 11. So Latavius Murray is probably going to be a fixture in my starting lineup. But we'll go more into that later on. But again, it was a closer matchup than what I was anticipating. But I think looking at the matchup is teams should be worried more so now than what they were when they go against Sean's team after this matchup. So the other matchup was Bryan versus Scott. And where is that?
Got it. I got it.
All right, so you can go into it.
Scotty with a negative 0.5 from Breida. Not great, but your boy, Dion Lewis, coming through for him, his highest point scorer for the week with 18.5. So kudos to you. Nice trade, guys. But proved to be insignificant, not enough going against Bryan. 34.5 from Kareem Hunt. That dude has been a problem over the last few weeks.
Yep.
He's got to. He might be the number 1 fantasy back, I would imagine at this point. Definitely in the top 3 there. He's got his last.
He's top 5.
His last 5 weeks are 16, 25, 16, 27, 34. That'll get it done. Landry coming through for him kind of for the first time this year. He's got to be happy to see that. 20 and a half points from Landry, 10 grabs, 97 and a touchdown. Kind of what he needed there. Tight end's a problem. Rudolph, not a guy who's I think we had some higher expectations for him coming into this year, but hasn't really done it. He's got O.J. Howard on the bench. Interesting for Bryan here is he does have Amari Cooper, and we know the trade that happened this week, Cooper to Dallas. You wonder, can he kind of figure it out? Like, he's 24, he's been to 2 Pro Bowls, but they kind of hated him in Oakland. And, I don't know what he is. I haven't really watched him play. He was obviously awesome in college at Alabama. As a Dallas fan, I'm hoping he can really get it going. But if Wortman can get Cooper to get on a roll here, 2 and 5 can turn into 8 and 5 and maybe gets in. That's all I'm going to say. I think it's a long shot, but it's a shot. Your thoughts?
Bryan's definitely got a shot at making the playoffs. I mean, well, first let me talk about Cooper. So it does sound like now that he's on the Cowboys, you're a little bit more optimistic about him than when he was on the Raiders. But I've always said that he has the talent. He just hasn't really put it all together. You could say that about a bunch of wide receivers that, don't really, make it in the NFL. But his first 2 years were over 1,000-yard seasons. He was on pace for, one of the fastest starts for a receiver in his career. And then just the last year and a half just hasn't had that consistency show up. Now being in Dallas, he does get open consistently. I will say that. His hands are the problem, but when it comes to Dak, he likes to throw to open receivers. When he had Dez Bryant there, he didn't really like to throw to Dez all too much because he doesn't get open, and it was a 50-50 ball all the time. So I do think it's a good pairing between Amari Cooper and Dak Prescott. They needed a receiver. So I do think better days are going to come. Maybe optimistic, like, I don't know, low-end wide receiver 2 numbers for Amari Cooper. But I've said, from the beginning of the season that Bryan has one of the better teams. He is getting carried by Kareem Hunt, but he also didn't have Antonio Brown in this game. So when you have a core 4 of Antonio Brown, Michael Thomas, Jarvis Landry, and Kareem Hunt, that's going to be a problem. Now, Bryan does have, I think, arguably the toughest schedule coming up going into the playoffs. I think there isn't one team that he plays that isn't in contention to play in the playoffs. I think he plays you this week, so we'll get into that in a little bit. But I think he also goes against, yeah, here it is. He goes against you, then Kevin, then me, then Timmy, then Tommy, then Timmy, and then finishes up with the Beaties. So that's a tough road right there for him to make it into the playoffs, although I can actually see it happen. But all right, so let me going over to Scotty's team. Yeah, Burrito, that looks bad. But he sat Andrew Luck, and going back and looking at it, yeah, you could always say, well, Jared Goff, is the better quarterback, but not fantasy wise. I mean, Andrew Luck has had, I think, yeah, he has 11 touchdowns in his last 3 games. He's the number 3 quarterback right now, and he's not that far away. I think he's only like 20 points away from Pat Mahomes, which is like unbelievable. I think Andrew Luck is maybe not 100% Andrew Luck, but I think he's about 95% back. So at least Scotty has that going for him, even though quarterbacks don't matter all too much. The rest of his team, I like how he had David Njoku there in his flex. He's probably going to swap him in for Jordan Reed in his tight end spot moving forward. The rest of his team didn't really do all that good, but once he gets Devontae Adams back, he should plug and play that guy. And also Doug Martin is the number 1 running back in Oakland. So, yeah, he's got some guys he can plug and play and have better weeks than his 89.6 point week. All right, moving on to Tommy versus. Go ahead.
Real quick on Cooper. Cooper has 2 games this year that stand out. He's got 10 grabs for 116 against Denver, and he's got 8 grabs for 128 and a touchdown against Cleveland. It seems like in Oakland he took advantage of the poorer matchups. If he can even just do that in Dallas, I think he's got to be cooking with something. I think he can turn into a low-end wide receiver 1, to be honest with you. It's just a quick hot take.
It's possible. I see it. But let's move forward. We're still on the first slide, and we're already almost a half hour in. So last matchup was Tommy versus Nick. Nick has his problems when it comes to wide receivers. I didn't see Jermaine Kearse putting up a goose egg in that matchup. I think he had the most routes run out of all Jets receivers. I don't know. Maybe it was just the Vikings knew that he was their best wide receiver, so they bracketed him and made sure he didn't produce all too much, but didn't get good performances out of his money guys in Zeke and David Johnson. They combined for under 14 points. Don't really see that happening, I think, ever again this season. Bright spot is Nick Chubb is now the starting running back in Cleveland, and when it came to Nick Chubb's performance, I'm not going to say he looked amazing, that he looked special. He looked like a better version of Carlos Hyde. And that's fine, because Carlos Hyde has produced so far this year, at least when it comes to a fantasy standpoint. But if he can be Carlos Hyde, but with long speed and break off those long runs like what he did in Oakland earlier this year, I think he could be like a top 16, top 14 running back. And then Nick would have 3 running backs in the top 14. That's good. That's good for the kid. Still needs to do some work on his wide receivers, but it's not as terrible as it was in the beginning of the year, with Willie Snead, performing well. But we'll go more into Nick's team once we see a starting lineup this week. And then when it comes to Tommy's team, Tommy didn't get amazing performances. He kind of got carried by Marlon Mack. That's probably going to be Marlon Mack's best game this year. He did perform extremely well, but I'm still not a fan of Marlon Mack. And you were going to say something?
No, it's sad when guys like Marlon Mack go for 31 points in fantasy. It shouldn't happen.
Shouldn't happen. He's not that great of a player, but he took advantage of a plus matchup. Emmanuel Sanders had a great game. I think Emmanuel Sanders is a borderline wide receiver one for the rest of the
Yeah,
season.
no question.
I mean, he's produced like that so far this year, but I think moving forward, he's still going to be, that borderline wide receiver one option. I love Emmanuel Sanders, drafted by the Steelers, by the way. And Tommy's got a good team. DeAndre, Robert Woods. He's sat Sterling Shepard, who had a really good game against Atlanta, but everybody should have a good game against Atlanta. He's got some guys he can mix in there on a week-to-week basis and put up a consistent 120 points.
All I'm going to say about this matchup is I don't respect people who start Eli Manning as their quarterback, so
Agreed.
I don't really want to talk about it.
Agreed. All right, so when it comes to our picks, I went 2-3. Doug went 3-2, and so did Bryan. So I'm at 20-15. Doug's at 16-19, and Bryan's at 19-16. I was this past week's top performer at 143.2, and Nick comes in as the lowest performer at 82.1. All right, so a quick recap of the standings. Right now, I'm at first with a record of 6-1. Timmy's right behind me at 5-2. Kevin and Matt. So I actually put Kevin and Matt because I don't know if you saw, but on the YouTube channel, Matt wanted a shout out because we both know it's Matt that's drafting Kevin's team every year. So we can give some props to Matt for coming through with some great drafts. Maybe it's even Matt that's running the team this entire time. We have no idea.
Very secretive in that camp.
Yeah, but at least Matt wanted a shout out, so there you go, Matt. So they're 5-2. Tommy's 5-2. So those right now are the teams that are in the playoffs. The playoffs started today, but they don't. And the Beaties are right behind them at 4-3. You're in sixth place with a record of 3-4. And there goes Bryan, seventh place. After being in last place or tied for last place for most of the year, he's in seventh place at 2-5. So he can make a quick run. Then Sean, Scotty are both at 2-5, and then Nick at 1-6. Does anything stand out to you in regards to the standings?
No, I think this is kind of where we thought we'd be. We said coming in that we thought you had one of the better teams. I think Timmy hanging in there in second position is it's good for the kid. He's got a good team. He's kind of keeping it going here. The Matty Kev contingent, probably mostly Matt, hanging up there too. It's one of those two guys has to get knocked off their pedestal if one of the other perennial powerhouses is going to get in, and me or Bryan. So we'll see how it progresses. I think the next 2-3 weeks are very important, obviously, for the top 7 guys in the standings.
Totally agree. I think the 3/4 seed is definitely up there for the taking for about 5 different teams.